So welcome to this episode of In the Half Light, Voices from Black Ireland. Today we'll be talking to three people who've written about their own lives and experiences of growing up mixed race in Ireland. They come from different generations and different parts of Ireland, and each has chosen to tell their story in their own way. What we're interested in today is not just the events themselves, but how memory works and what feels possible to say at different points in one life, but also how personal storytelling becomes a way of making sense of a society that leaves these experiences out of the record. So I'd like to introduce you to Marguerite, Jackie and Leon.
Apart from having my children, one of my proudest moments has been Grand Marshal of Limerick Pride. Limerick will always be home, and its people are my family. They have always got my back and understood and allowed me to be me. One of my biggest challenges has been attending a gala to celebrate Black and Irish people. Tony Connolly's menswear fitted me for a tux, and I felt $1 million. The only problem was I was growing increasingly nervous the nearer it got to the event. At one point, I called Ian O'Neill, who is now a friend, to say that I wasn't sure if I could go. "You have to go," she said, inviting me to join her and her family. Why am I so nervous, I wondered. The answer came to me at 2 o'clock in the morning. All my life, I fought to prove that I'm Irish, that I belonged in this country. I owed so much to Limerick and my country. I felt I was being disloyal to my Jamaican side, and I had also felt a bit of a fake because I didn't really know much about Jamaica apart from my beloved Bob Marley. I got up the next morning and made a TikTok saying how I felt, that I had lived my 63 years trying to make people see past my colour and embrace me as Irish. Now I said I could no longer just see myself as just being Irish. To make me feel whole, I had to be both. I didn't know how my followers would take it. I needn't have worried. Their response overwhelmingly was, "You're the most Irish person we know, but you're also Jamaican. Go and be proud of who you are." As I had never felt black enough to be seen as black, and never white enough to be seen as white, where I sit can often feel like a lonely place. One comment in particular resonated with me. "Maybe, Jackie, you're the one who brings us all together." I took a deep breath, put on my tux, and off I went. I'd been asked onto the Bev De Silva music show on RT2 FM before the ball, and I was unbelievably nervous. The show was coming live from the ball, and he was going to talk to me about my sporting achievements. I confided in him that I felt a bit of an imposter at the ball, and he said, "I totally get where you're coming from, but you're a trailblazer and you're going to be celebrated because you've done us all proud." I went into the room, and for the first time in my life, I embraced who I am. That night at the Black and Irish event, I embraced Jackie O'Halloran O'Brien McCarthy for all that I am.
I might ask each of you to briefly say what you wrote and what made you feel it was worth putting on the page.
I suppose for me, it was a healing journey to be able to look back at my younger self, to see me now at the age of 60, coming up on 65, to bridge the gap between little Jackie and who I've become through circumstances, through life's journey. Yes, and to be able to embrace the younger me and accept myself completely for who I am today.
For me, I suppose writing the book was about finding my true identity. You know, being adopted as well as being mixed race has its own other set of complications. So I never really knew who I was completely. So that was part of it. And I suppose about, letting people know about the experience that I've had, and also to educate people and, that this did happen and it continues to happen today. So if we don't speak up about it, people won't learn from it. And I think it will help other people to come forward and tell their story too.
Yeah, and I suppose similar to Jackie and Mags, part of it was healing, part of it was trying to help other people understand. For me, it was about helping people to see how I went about becoming comfortable in my own identity and that journey to being happy with myself and all of the kind of trials and tribulations with that, and trying to equip them with the, I suppose, tools to help them do it too if they feel like they need to do it. I think about my journey growing up as a mixed race kid and what I had to deal with in terms of like racism and identity. And I feel like nowadays those problems are still there, but there's additional kind of avenues for racism to get to people, like through social media and kind of widespread kind of rhetoric and stuff. So yeah, that's why I wanted to write the book.
So one of the things I'm interested in is the idea that telling your own story is not just personal, but it's a way of producing knowledge also about Ireland that doesn't usually, as I've said, make it into the official history. So when you were writing your book, did it feel that way to you, or did it feel like you were just speaking for yourselves and your own experiences?
For me, the book was for me. I just listened to the other two answers and it's about helping others. But for me, I think the journey was a self-discovery. So if I couldn't sit down and speak to the younger me, first and foremost, then it wouldn't be honest, it wouldn't feel real. And if it helped somebody out along the way, that was great. And I feel since I've written it, it is more history because it's 64 years from birth right up to date. And when I look back on it, I see parts of Ireland that has changed. I see things that I went through as a child that were more through ignorance than they are today. We're all educated. We have social media. We can find the answer to anything. I didn't have that as a child growing up. So Ireland has changed, but the situation for children that look like me has actually got worse rather than better. So I think it's important for me when I look at and stand over my book, I see how it has become, when you look back, where things have changed or where they haven't changed and where they need to change. And I mean, all of the other two speakers, they are, because they seem to have dealt with stuff so much younger than I have and know who they are and got their sense of identity. My sense of identity is still emerging and has become stronger since I put it on the book. So I would say for me, yes, definitely a history of Ireland. But for me, it was a very, very personal journey.
I think for me, I've mixed feelings on why I wrote the book. Initially, I was just writing it for myself. I was like, oh yeah, I might just do a little bit of this and see where I get. And I never expected to publish a book. I never told anybody I was writing the book either. So I didn't have anybody to be a sounding board. And the reason I didn't tell anyone as well was because I didn't want to make it into this big thing. I didn't want loads of opinions coming to me. It was just a personal thing at the beginning. But then, when I did give in and say, I'll send it into publishers, and I had no expectation that it was going to be published. I thought absolutely not. So it was a big shock to me when I got the publication deal, because the reality hit that, oh my God, people are going to be reading my thoughts. And it sounds funny now. Well, obviously you're writing a book, it's getting published. Yes, people are going to read it. So then, and like Jackie, as you said, it's like, I really felt like although I thought I knew myself, I knew there was a whole other side that I didn't know. Obviously, culturally, about my family, everything was a guest being adopted. My adoptive parents, Nolene and Michael, they were just fantastic. And I'm only using the word adoptive parents because people get confused when you're talking about different sets of parents. So it's no disrespect to my mum and dad, Nolene and Michael. When I say adoptive parents, it's just to help people determine all the sides. But I think once I started writing, that's when the healing began for me. And when I say healing, we're talking nightmares, we're talking trauma, we're talking, oh my God, as the memories started coming through, they got stronger and stronger. And it was really difficult time. And again, couldn't share it with anybody because I hadn't told anyone I was doing this project, shall we say. So, but then I got really adamant that no, I want to talk. I want to tell people, that this is what's happening, and continues to happen today. For me, it was a few different things. It was mother and baby home. It was being adopted. It was being mixed race. It was disability. And probably the hardest thing, I know it might sound funny to talk about, was disability for me. Whereas, I was proud that I was black or mixed race. That was something that I'd never have given up. Like, people would have asked, oh, would you like to be white? Just out of curiosity. And I was like, no. So I always owned that part of me, which is great from a younger age. But when the book came out and then I started talking to people, and I think the feedback really helps as well. Because when you realise that, I remember this one person messaged to say, after I'd spoken on radio, message into the radio station, and they phoned me to tell me this particular story. And they said that their mum had been listening to the radio station and heard my story, and afterwards called the family together that evening and admitted that she had had a child. And they said, we always knew there was something wrong with their mum. She had this sadness within her, and they never knew what it was. But she said, after hearing my story and me speaking publicly, that it helped her say, do you know what, it's okay to come out and say this. And, as a family, they came together and they were like, we're just so grateful that we're able to help my mum now. And I think little stories like that make such a difference. And I suppose the resilience side, in my job, we talk a lot about resilience, and we all have it. Some of us have more of it, but I think it's important for people to recognise their own resilience. And by hearing our stories, my book is the oldest of the other two experts here. So it's great that, as you had said before, Phil, that we're making history. It's written down, it's going to be forever there, in centuries to come. And that's something I actually never thought about. So thanks for that thought. But it is brilliant. And I hope more people, that are listening today or whenever they listen to the podcast say, you know what, I'm going to write it down as well. And I'm going to do that. Because it is a brilliant thing to do. And it does free you an awful lot.
Yeah, it is great that you're writing your personal story, and like you're learning about yourself, you're learning about kind of how you dealt with things maybe in the past, and it is always, like, I think, a positive thing to like own your story and write your story or connect with your story. But I do think that unintentionally there are parts of it that connect with Irish history, and in time to come, these kind of pieces will be looked back on and like will be used as ways of understanding, Ireland at the time a little bit better. So my book kind of deals with from the kind of mid-90s to today. It's talking about kind of, some of the racism that was in the area in Tallaght in the 90s and the 90s. But it goes into other things as well. Like, I talk about my experience during COVID and how, the death of George Floyd happens and the impact that has on me as a Black Irish man. Then the kind of emergence of Black and Irish, but then again, like 6 months later, the death of George and Kencho. And it talks about that too, and kind of the experiences that many kind of young Black people were experiencing on the island and what we were doing. And then as well, the riots that happened in 2023. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about how the night before the Black and Irish book had done really well at the book awards, but then the next day we're thrown into essentially a race riot, and how that is such a difficult thing to go through. And like, I think there will be parts of the book that will denote facts, like as in like this factually happened, but I think the context of how people felt about these things as well is equally as important history that we often miss out on, because it changes societal narratives and it changes the way that society is going, So yeah, I think Irish history is kind of mixed in with the story. I don't think it's intentional, but it is there.
But everyday lives can still kind of put a spotlight on what's actually happening, and particularly from a particular point of view, you see it maybe differently to even the people around you. And I suppose for me, Leon, when I was reading your book, one of the things I was interested in, because you did reference George Floyd and then you referenced George and Kensho. Were you surprised at that time that were all these marches for George Floyd, but then when it happened here on the soil itself, there wasn't the same kind of galvanizing around George and Kensho?
Yeah, I did notice it. And like, I think there was two vastly different contexts. The first context was, it wasn't here, it was over there. And, oh God, isn't that awful over there? And it was the same when Black and Irish was starting, a lot of the discussion was on the racism that was happening in America. And like, I'd seen people write like actual letters on a screen that, thank God we don't have racism in Ireland. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Going mad. Am I going mad here? So yeah, I do think that there's a difference in the kind of mindset when things are happening, abroad to here. And even some of the rhetoric that was used, like around both of the Georges who were killed, but very quickly there was, rhetoric that these people were not good people, or very quickly used, but that didn't land with George Floyd as much as I think it did with George and Kensho here in Ireland, obviously the kind of circumstances around George and Kensho's death and stuff like that gave people an out, I feel. They felt like they had an out, and they were like, oh, well, that's, it's tragic, but, it is what it is. And that for me was sad. I think we need to recognize that the level of solidarity needs to be consistent across the board. Like, you need to show as much venom for what's happening abroad as to what's happening here. But yeah, I do think that there was a difference between the two.
That's really interesting. And I suppose looking back when you're writing your book, are there experiences from growing up that only made sense to you now and that you couldn't have written about, say, at the time when they were happening, when you were younger?
Yeah, I think you'll always get that, but definitely in relation to the racism, definitely, because like I was born in 1974. The only Black people or mixed race people were on television. As I say in my book, the first time I met somebody of, mixed race or a different colour to myself, apart from white, was when I was in 5th class, half a year in 5th class. I met my friend Katrin Sheikh, and she had Irish Indian background. So everything to me was, not real, as in I could see celebrities on TV, and yeah, they were the same colour as me or darker. But I never could relate to anybody, humanly, shall we say, from day to day. So every reference was somebody that was on TV. And my parents were great. Like, they always made me feel proud of who I was. And yes, I was always the only Black or mixed race person everywhere we went. So I suppose the only one in the village, shall we say. But, that was really difficult at times, because obviously everybody's staring at you, but my parents sold that to me as in, you're so beautiful, they look to see it, nobody has seen anybody like you. They sold it to me in a positive manner, which is really good. They didn't instill fear. They didn't say, right, now when we go here, don't worry if somebody does this to you, or says this. To me, it was sold positively. So that helped me be, like, people will say to me, God, you're probably the most positive person I've ever met, But I think that's all helped me, even when I did, get racially abused at times. And it was hurtful, but I didn't, let it take over. I might get angry, I get annoyed, or, I'd, confront the person. But I didn't hold it into me for the rest of my life. Every situation is so different, but I definitely think it helped me to be that type of person.
Can you make more sense of it now than you could back then, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I don't know whether that's wisdom or, when you look back, hindsight. And I suppose educationally as well. And as Leon was saying, and Jackie was saying earlier on, back then we would have said, oh, it was ignorance when people were, racist, and there's no excuse for it now. It's just people don't even realise what they're saying. And for me, language is a big thing, and I'm really, into the way people speak. And the language that's, become the norm now is completely different. And it's quite negative a lot. Everything, it's unbelievable. Like, that's a negative, So we're all our language is not just about racial. So I think that's really important as well. But I think, yeah, definitely looking back, I have a lot more hindsight about stuff that I got through that I just considered the norm because it was the norm to me. Whereas I look back now and go, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. You know, so that's a big light bulb moment many a time going back, you know.
And Jackie, you talk about not going to school from the age of 12. Can you make sense of that? Or were you able to make sense of it back then and all of the other stuff that was happening in your life?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that your parents said you were beautiful and you were, you know, for me, my parents really, they were there for me. They were as much as they could. They equipped me in the funniest ways. You know, growing up, my dad gave me a stick one time with a nail in it and said, anybody that calls your names, go out and, you know, give them a whack of the stick. Yeah, really. And people find this, oh my God, your dad did that. But I think he knew who I was as a person, that stick would never be used. So his way of saying, what he actually said to me was, Jackie, your skin colour is never going to change. It's with you till the day you die. So you can either decide to go out and fight, or you can make something of yourself in spite of it and be yourself. And the interesting thing for me in writing the book, as I was writing it, looking back now, is there things that I couldn't do back then? Yes, most definitely. Because as a child of colour, I was the only one. Like yourself, I didn't see another person of colour unless it was on Tarzan or Elephant Boy or Dektari, which were the programmes that were there. And then at 12 or 13, when two young lads came into the shop that were at a handball tournament not far from my home, when I came up from under the counter, all three of us screamed because the last thing we were expecting was to see somebody that looked like one another. And that was a penny drop moment. Hang on a minute. I always think in Ireland, being a person of mixed heritage is the loneliest place in the world growing up, because you're not black enough to be part of the black community, and you're not white enough to be. And even today, I get messages on TikToks or whatever, and they go, oh, you're not the first black person to have played for Ireland. You're the first mixed race person. And more often than not, this is coming from a black person.
I know.
Reminding me. And it makes me feel like, oh, I don't belong there either. You know, and I would never say a mixed race. I'd say, oh, my mother was a human, my father was a human. There's only one race, so I'm not a mix of something, man, you know. And then learning, you know, biracial, the words for biracial, learning mixed heritage. I did not grow up in that era. I was black. And I often sit back and I think, you know, when I got called the N-word and I was the black and I was this and that, and now people want me to change that and I don't belong in either. It's a very frustrating, lonely place. So having wrote the book and studied myself, so to speak, and my low self-esteem of trying to please somebody, writing the book made me look back and say, God, I wish I could have held little Jackie and told her, it's okay to be you. You're unique in your own way. You've got the best of both worlds. So there's definitely a difference from today, having written it, to looking back at younger me. You know, it's knowledge, it's hard work.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really hard work sitting to write a book. And I wouldn't be the most articulate person, but it all came from my heart. And I noticed...
Anybody who would agree with that?
I completely disagree with
On that road with you.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that comes back to self-esteem again. And it's like when you grow up being told, my mother being told, get her a cleaning job because that's all she'll ever do. You know, and it's funny, we spoke about George Floyd. My first time public speaking, so to speak, was thrown in at the deep end in the Clare Byrne show in his first anniversary. I was there as the famous soccer player, which I didn't see myself as. And I remember saying to Claire 5 minutes before it went on, I said, Claire, I don't know why I'm here. You know, all these people are far more articulate than me. But in that day, I found my voice. And it was funny. She gave me the closing argument when I had relaxed and thought, she's finished with me. And then she turned, so how do you feel? And I'm like, and I just took a deep breath in that moment. And I remembered all the life lessons I had been given in a simple or maybe unique way to me from my parents. And I spoke my truth. And within that, I became more whole as a person. I embraced my sense of identity in a way. And it was like, I'm entitled to sit at this table. I do have a story to tell. It's about resilience, a word that I've only come to know.
Yeah.
The family I grew up in was like, just keep getting up. We've got your back. We're here for you. The Limerick that I grew up in was, that's our Jackie.
Yeah.
So I didn't understand the word resilience. And it's only when I sit and I reread the book, I go, oh God, I got back up from that. On that moment, yeah. And you put yourself back in it, and it's reliving it, and it's feeling the pain. But then coming to your last chapter and looking and going, wow, that's what resilience means. I did keep getting up in spite of. And where did that come from? And I embraced that as my mixed heritage, a bit of both. The Irish fighting spirit, the Jamaican love of people and wanting to connect. And now I embrace all of me.
Yeah.
So for me, when I say the book was about me, I had to be able to love myself. And I didn't up until those penny drop moments.
Absolutely. I think what you said there about the language is really interesting because like that, you know, the words mixed race, I never called myself mixed race. I was black and that was it. So then when all this terminology started coming up, I got really confused. And I, like still to this day, I don't know whether to say I'm black or a mixed race. So, and like when my book came out, it's all black, 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 you know, and now I'm looking, even last night when I was looking through it, the book and I was reading things, I was like, I wouldn't write that now. It's like, so that my book came out in 22, so it was finished in 21. So the difference in Ireland, shall we say, in those years has grown so much. And, you know, I was flicking through looking for a chapter last night and there was so many things I'd written and said, that's all completely different now. So even though, as we were saying earlier on, like, you know, there's a lot more black people, mixed race people in Ireland now, the racism is even bigger. You know, and that's what's frightening. So I get what you say about, like, I'd never have used biracial, you know, that's probably all American. But what's happening in the States is a sure thing that's going to travel to Britain and Ireland. So that's what I'm always saying to people, because people do turn around and say, oh yeah, but that's in America, like say George Floyd. And I'm like, well, you don't get it. Like that's what's coming here, you know, and we can see it creeping in over the last few years.
It's here.
Like the riots, as Leon was saying earlier on, in 2023, that was, I think, a big shockwave for Ireland to that, how quickly that escalated, you know, overnight. This is out in our streets, you know, and we see America as for the country that it is. It's huge. There's so many people. Ireland is very small. If this continues to grow, which it is, how bad is it going to get? You know, what is it going to be like out there? So I think that's quite frightening for, you know, everything and everyone today.
Yeah, I think going back to what Jackie said, though, in terms of the language and how the language is changing, and I think it's a generational thing because we were just black.
Yeah.
There was no grey area, let's say. You were just black and you were racialized as black.
Yeah.
And it feels sometimes like you've been re-racialized into a mixed race identity. But Leon, you kind of probably grew up more in that generation of mixed race.
Yeah.
Or how did you kind of identify, or I suppose for all of us, we were labelled and defined before we ever got to define ourselves.
Right, yeah.
So where did you fit in all of this?
Where I fit in was where I was put. So I was the mixed race kid because there were black kids telling me that I was the mixed race kid, or othered me to the point where I was like, okay, I'm not one of these guys, you know. But all of my experiences were the same, you know. Like I was experiencing racism, I was experiencing racial violence. When we were in groups, they weren't saying, you know, all you black kids and you and you one mixed race kid that's with them. You know, it was just you black such and such group of X, Y, and Z. Yeah, that was difficult because like as a kid you just want to fit in, don't you? Like you just want to be one of the a group of something, you know. And I think, you know, as you were saying, Jackie, it can be a very lonely place, you know. So that's where I was, but I had to internally deal with that and say, well, no, actually, hold on. Like my experiences dictate otherwise, and internally I believe otherwise now. You know, actually, I wasn't even mixed race. I was half caste. That was why.
I absolutely hate that word.
Yeah, I know.
Horrible word.
Yeah.
So many people use it.
Yeah.
I don't know where it came from, but I've still heard people saying it, and then people that are mixed race or black don't mind it. But to me, that's like something that was taken from the bin. It's nearly as bad as the N word in my opinion.
It was. Yeah,
It's worse.
They both have their really negative connotations.
Don't they? Yeah.
You know, and but no one in the area understood what half caste meant. Like I think, I'm sure there was even like people in authority that shouldn't have been using that term that were using it.
Yeah.
Oh, you're that half caste kid. You know what I mean? So, you know, it definitely is like an othering that happens. But you like internally, you need to go, well, hold on, where like I can't go through my whole life telling myself I'm half of something. You know, I am 100% of me. That's it. You know, and that 100% is made up of many different things. But I'm 100% of all of those things too. You know, I'm 100% Irish, 100% Senegalese. I'm like,
I think that's a great way.
You know, that's the way I was starting to view it. I went from half of a couple of things to two things, and that really helped me. You know, like that was an exponential growth in my identity. I know there's a lot of young kids that still go through that. They're not enough of, they feel like they're not enough of something, but they are, you know, like you are. And like, I'd use it interchangeably now. Like I would feel comfortable referring to myself as a black man. I'd feel comfortable referring to myself as a mixed race man. I prescribe to the belief that we are human and that's it. But I also understand that these racialized constructs are also, they exist and we have to navigate those too. And that's what a lot of people see the world through. They see the world through that spectrum of colour and stuff as well. So I try and use that language, but ultimately I would like to get to the point where everyone is like, so that, like, you know, we have bigger problems to deal with. You know, it doesn't matter what they are. We have a climate that's going
well, people are fascinated with it. Like it's such a big thing about colour. And, you know, I think when I wrote my book and say friends and family were reading in it, you know, and, you know, that was the hard thing for me. It was more, strangers you're okay with because they don't know you personally. But for your family and friends, it was very difficult for me. Like I remember the day that my book arrived, I was working from home, and obviously everybody is so excited, you know, about this book. I was terrified. And I was like, oh my God, people are going to read this now. You know, so what am I going to do? So the book arrives, my sister comes over to the house. So it's my mum, dad and my sister. My friend Liz was there as well. And they were like literally ripping open the box and the excitement. And the first thing my sister said is, right, we're all going to sit down now and we're going to read the book together. And I was like, no, we're not. I was like, I'm not reading that. I'm not sitting here while you're reading that or whatever. And she was so shocked. She was like, but why not? And I was like, oh no, I couldn't. No, my nerves would be gone. I wouldn't be able to. So they all individually read the book. And anyway, and I remember I finished work, say at about 5 that day, and they were all stuck into it. I was literally shaking, going, what are they going to think, you know, about things I've said, you know, and like they came out and they were like, God, they were blown away, you know. And in particular, like my mom, my dad and my sister were like, God, we didn't think that could be much about us in the book. And I was like, but you're my family, of course, you know. And they were blown away because I was a very private person. I never spoke about anything, even stuff that happened like racist, you know, abuse and things. I might come home and say, oh, this happened. And I'd shrug it off and keep it to myself and deal with it like internally, as Leon was saying, and yourself. That's how I think we got through things. And that's the lonely part, as you said, because you're afraid to upset. Like if I told my sister, like Kira and I are the same age, I'm adopted. So there's only 3 months between us. So she's like really overprotective of me. Like if I told her half the things that happened to me, she'd probably be in my joy today, you know? So you have to kind of nearly dampen down things when it happens to keep everybody under control and that nobody's upset. So for me, their reaction to the book and, you know, they were like, we're so proud of you. And, you know, I think that gave me the strength. And Jackie, as you said, that when you got to a stage and you look back and saw how resilient you were, like I was the same. I thought nothing of everything that happened to me. I was like, oh yeah, so that happened, I ended up having an operation. I ended up paralyzed and then, blah, blah, blah. But I just shrugged all that off. And then after I wrote the book, I look back and I was like, how did I get through any of that? Yeah. You know, so that's why I love the word resilience now. Yeah. And I'm always telling people, friends, you know, we are all resilient. I'm pointing out the resilience. It might be a slightest thing, you know, somebody that has depression and they're still able to get up, get themselves to work. That's resilience, you know, so I think that's really important.
Yeah, but usually it works best if you have a support.
Yeah.
It's hard to be resilient on your own because it puts it back onto the individual to fix whatever's wrong.
Yeah.
As opposed to the structures around them and the systems around them.
Yeah.
You know, and without any support.
Thinking Aloud, Thinking Together is a new conversation series from Skeen in partnership with the Museum of Literature Ireland, amplifying voices that have been silenced in Irish cultural life. It brings together artists, writers and thinkers whose work offers a radical new perspective on existing narratives. Thinking Aloud, Thinking Together provides a space to discuss points of connection and concern in contemporary culture. These conversations explore topics that are seldom spoken of in mainstream public discourse in Ireland, such as identity, relationships, shame, exclusion, and reversing the impact of erasure from history and culture. It offers a space for us to reconsider our relationship with one another, to reimagine the ways in which we live, and to rewrite the legacies we leave behind. Supported by the Rowan Trust and the Arts Council of Ireland. Produced by Ian Mullaney. Music by Oisín Walsh Pilo. For more information, visit skeenpress.com.